The new 2023 Ford Escape is the perfect getaway car. Featuring an available 13.1-inch center stack screen, 360-degree camera, and Bang & Olufsen sound system and spatial flexibility for extra legroom. The new 2023 Ford Escape. Learn more at Ford.com. Some models, trims, and features may not be available or may be subject to change.
Does where you live feel a lot smaller lately? Are there less people walking around or more for sale signs in yards? If this is the case, then you probably live in one of the 88 U.S. cities experiencing population loss right now. Since the pandemic, large metropolitan areas are seeing continued dips in population like never before. For Hans Johnson, a demographer and senior fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California, this means witnessing a mass exodus out of his home state.
For Los Angeles, they lost 130,000 in their household population since the 2020 census. San Jose lost 57,000. San Diego lost 14,000. San Francisco lost over 40,000 people, about a 5% decline. It's a notable decline and one that reverses what had been for San Francisco a growing population prior to that.
And cities within California aren't the only ones. New York City, Boston, and Washington, D.C. all had the greatest percentages of population loss between 2020 and 2021. Not far behind are Seattle, St. Louis, and Atlanta, who all saw significant declines as well. Johnson explains how the pandemic acted as a catalyst for much of this shift.
The cities that have done pretty well economically, again, including many of these cities in California, are losing population because housing is so expensive. And especially what we've seen since the pandemic is the number of people who work remotely has increased dramatically. It's a large number of people who work remotely are keeping their jobs in places like San Francisco or San Jose or Los Angeles, but moving to a much less expensive place to live.
The Pew Research Center reports that the average monthly rent cost has risen 12% from pre-pandemic levels. According to Zumper, a popular renting platform, the top 5 most expensive cities to live in are New York City, Jersey City, San Francisco, Miami, and coming in last at number 5 is Boston. The median monthly rent price for a one-bedroom apartment in New York City is $3,780. With these sky-high rents, this added cost just isn't worth it for many Americans. Not to mention the housing market in many U.S. cities is still hot post-pandemic. Even with shrinking populations, there's still high demand.
So there's places like Detroit where tearing down houses is one of the chief objectives of policy there to keep them from becoming derelict. So there's so many vacant housing units. One of the challenges had been demolishing those units. And what's different, especially in this era now of population loss for California, is that we don't have huge numbers of vacant housing units. It's not like neighborhoods are completely emptying out. What's happening instead is that even as we lose population, we still have some housing units being built and people moving into those housing units. It's just fewer people per household now than in the past. And that might sound like kind of a boring technical detail, but it goes to the heart of how you can have a population that's declining even as you're building new housing and even as people are moving into that housing.
In fact, even though California, New York, and Washington, D.C. are all experiencing population loss, they're also in the midst of a housing shortage. Non-luxury units are in short supply and are going quickly. With this in mind, it's understandable why people are leaving urban areas in droves, but where exactly are they moving to?
The long-standing history in terms of interstate migration is kind of movement out of the Northeast, to some extent to the Midwest, and often to the South and to the West. Now, that's the general rule. There are exceptions, and there are exceptions within each of those regions. And what's happened most recently is that California, which used to attract people from the rest of the United States, is now sending out large numbers of people to other states. And then nationally, one of the things that we've seen that almost certainly is related to the pandemic is some of this nation's cities that had in the past maybe experienced population decline many decades ago, but then kind of had a resurgence, New York City being the most prominent among them, are starting to see some population decline associated with the pandemic.
While many of these moves are consistent with past trends, there are some unique shifts happening right now. Like Johnson said, people aren't moving to California, they're moving out. And most of them are going to the South. Specifically, they're going to Texas. Unlike states along the East and West Coast, Texas actually houses some of the nation's fastest-growing cities. Companies like Tesla, Google, Apple, and Hewlett-Packard have all made the move or expanded to Austin. However, the big influx is causing Austin to experience several growing pains, one of them being a huge housing shortage. Residents who've lived in and around the city for decades are being priced out of their homes as prices skyrocket. Travel further west, and San Francisco is dealing with the opposite problem.
It has implications for revenue for those cities. If there's fewer people commuting in San Francisco, by our estimate, the number of people commuting to office jobs in San Francisco declined by half over the last few years because of the pandemic. So that's a big change in terms of what's happening in retail, for example, in the places where people used to commute into work. Mass transit is another one. Huge budget issues for transit agencies that had in the past focused on getting a lot of commuters into the central business district. In the Bay Area case, that would be BART especially, but also even the bus lines. So those transit agencies are hurting financially as well. And then I kind of alluded to this, but there's the retail sector, so that the economic activity on a retail level has greatly reduced when you have just fewer people in the city during the day.
To help places like San Francisco, local officials have to work together to keep the city going with less revenue. In addition, it also means finding solutions to hard problems. Issues like how to reduce increasing crime or bring companies back to once full high-rises. As for what else cities can do to slow population decline, Johnson admits that he's not quite sure. The pandemic has created uncertainty, and it's hard to tell if these unusual trends are temporary or indicate a more serious long-term shift. Either way, across time, it's important to remember that the population of many areas will always wax and wane. To find out more about Hans Johnson and all of our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. Check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written by Associate Producer Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
African-American horsemen never left the racetrack. They have always had a really significant role.
The forgotten contributions of fearless horse jockeys like Isaac Murphy. Then,
once you cross the event horizon, your continued fall is inevitable. There is nothing you can do to halt your decline.
Understanding the dark, mysterious abyss that is a black hole. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like James. When he found out how much USAA was helping members save, he said,
"It's time to switch."
We'll help you find the right coverage at the right price. USAA. What you're made of, we're made for. Restrictions apply.